All right, so we need to make sure we're understanding what the size of a matrix is. So if it has 3 rows and 4 columns, we call it a 3 by 4 matrix. So 3 rows and 4 columns. So this would be the shape. So 3 by 4. Okay. So here I want you to find the echelon, so not reduced echelon, just echelon 2 by 2 matrices that are not 0. So that means not every one is 0, because that's kind of the trivial stupid case, all zeros. Putting squares for non-zero numbers and stars for any number that could be a 0. So what are the different forms that I could have? Well, I could have a square here, a star here, circle or a 0 there, and a square there. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to make one side square and one side parentheses. All right, something like that. All right, so let's do another one. So I could have a square here, and then I could have a non-zero number there, and then I could have 2 zeros there. One other option I can think of, a 0 here, a square here, and then zeros below. Because remember, whenever I have a pivot, I have to have zeros below it for echelon form. So those are the 3 kinds of echelon forms for 2 by 2 matrices. All right, so let's try it for 3 by 2. So 3 by 2, the size of those will look like this, right? Okay, so the different ways of getting pivots. So I could have a pivot here, a non-zero. I have to have a 0 below the pivot, right? And then here, and then 0, 0. So that's one way. Then I could have the pivot here, and then I know that I have to have zeros below the pivot. Or I could have a pivot here, a non-zero, and then 2 rows of zeros. I think those are the only 3 ways to have echelon form with this size of a matrix. All right, so now we're going to make the augmented matrix and get it into RREF. So that means zeros below the pivots and zeros above the pivots. All right, let's start by making sure we get in everything in its placeholders. 0, 2, negative 8, 8. Negative 4, 5, 9, negative 9. Okay, so let's start by getting a 0 here. So if I multiply row 1 by 4 and add it to row 3. So let me bring it down here. 1, 0. This row stays the same. So I get a 0, multiply by 4 and add. That'll give me a negative 3. Multiply by 4 and add. That'll give me a 13. And this will stay negative 9. I can see that it's going to be useful to multiply 1/2 times row 2. So let's keep row 1 the same. Negative 4, 4. And then let's just bring this guy along. All right. So now I want to get a 0 here. So I want to multiply row 2 by 3 and add it to row 3. So the first row stays the same, second row stays the same. So multiply by 3 and add, that gives me a 0. Multiply by 3 and add, that gives me a 1. Multiply by 3, so 12 minus 9 is a 3. All right, so got my 1s in my pivots. So now I need to get it in RREF, I need to have both zeros below the pivots and zeros above the pivots. So at this point, I want to multiply row 2 by 2 and add it to row 1. So let me write down row 2, 0, 1, negative 4, 4. Multiply by 2 and add, that gives me a 0 there. Multiply by 2 and add, that gives me a negative 7. And then multiply by 2 and add, that gives me an 8. All right, and let me write this last row down again. All right, so now I need to get zeros in these 2 positions. So let's multiply 4 times row 3 and add it to row 2. So 0, 0, 1, 3. So multiply by, that stays a 1. Multiply by 4 and add, that's a 0. Multiply by 4, 12 plus 4 is 16. Okay, and last but not least, I want to get a 0 here. So I want a 7 times row 3 and add it to row 1. So that stays the same, that stays the same, 0, so multiply by 7, 21 and 8 is 29. All right, so we can solve the system now. This last row says x3 is 3, the second row says x2 is 16, and x1 is 29.